Hi everyone, welcome back to Harp and Guitar, People and Music. Thanks for joining me here once again today for another episode of Whiskey's Blues Gumbo. You know what we do here, it's that show where we take those weird or crazy blues words or phrases and try to figure out what they're talking about over there. And today I've got one that many of us have probably heard before. It's still referenced quite often, and that term is Chitlin circuit. And well, let's kind of dive into it here. Chitlins. What are chitlins? Chitlins are sort of a southern United States African American um, sort of derived term from chitterings, and chitterings, of course, are generally speaking the large intestine from pork, from pigs. And what you do is they're washed thoroughly multiple times, and then they're boiled, often with onions and spices in there to kind of keep down the foul smell. And chitterins or chitlins have sort of come to be known as soul food. They're sort of a delicacy. And you kind of boil them up, cook them kind of, over a long period of time, and they get nice and tender. And you often serve them with some hot sauce. Sometimes you kind of deep fry them too. Often they're deep fried, almost like calamari as well. But more often than not, they're served with hot sauce, and it's kind of a soul food thing. Now, the origins of chitlins or chitterings actually comes from way back in time of slavery, when the slave owners would try to save as much money as possible when feeding their slaves. So they obviously didn't feed them the best of foods. They didn't feed them all of the prime cuts of meats and all that sort of thing. So oftentimes the slaves, even though they were the hardest working people on the plantation, got the crummiest food. So they had to come up with unique, inventive, and more palatable ways to prepare and eat these foods. And chitlins was one of those things. Now, the chitlin circuit is something that refers to um, sort of a blues circuit that a lot of blues artists played, especially sort of from the 20s until about the 1960s or so, when slavery had obviously long been abolished, but there were still Jim Crow laws and there was a lot of segregation going on in the United States, especially in the South. So there was a lot of clubs and venues and nightclubs and musical venues and that sort of thing where African American musicians, no matter who they were, no matter how good they were just not permitted to play there. So a bunch of juke joints and bars and eateries and diners and that sort of thing would have a music room in the back, or they would have a juke joint attached to a diner or a restaurant. And they were often black owned or African American owned businesses. So they didn't bother with the Jim Crow laws. They would have, blues artists come and go all they wanted. And there's a little bit of a misconception as well that the Chitlin circuit was only in the South, and that's not true actually. The Chitlin circuit was in the Northeast and then down the East and then ran along the South. So there were blues joints even up in New York City that were on the Chitlin circuit, places like in Harlem, for example. They would have performers come as part of the Chitlin circuit. And basically, what this meant was an artist would tour either by car or by bus, and they would just go from place to place to place and work their way along through the Chitlin circuit. And there was a lot of artists that started doing that in the late 40s and early 50s, right through into the 60s. And a lot of them actually still do travel along this sort of route, even though it's still sort of loosely referred to as the Chitlin Circuit, but obviously the Jim Crow laws are completely over with now, and segregation is completely done with. But it was met with such success that a lot of these joints that opened up in the 30s and 40s are still open today, and they still have blues artists come by and perform. In fact, guys like Bobby Rush, for example, who is still out there, still performing, still touring, still recording and putting out albums. He just put out an album last year, actually, which I think was nominated for a Grammy. Bobby Rush has been performing for about, geez, 50 or 60 years now, and he still does tour the Chitlin circuit. Other more notable, perhaps, or more recognizable names that started off doing the Chitlin circuit and kind of jumped up from there were guys like B.B. King, Little Milton, Junior Parker, Junior Wells, the famous harmonica player who was part of the dynamic blues duo with Mr. Buddy Guy. And a lot of these artists toured the Chitlin circuit right through the 70s, and like I said, some of them still do. But the Chitlin circuit was started in the 20s as a result of segregation. So, like I said, it didn't matter how many recordings and how famous a blues artist was. Hey, if like B.B. King said, if you play the blues, and you're black, then hey, it's like being black twice, right? So they couldn't play at a lot of these places like Carnegie Hall and that sort of thing. They could only play at the Apollo Theater in Harlem and at these little juke joints or these little places, in behind diners and that sort of thing. So there you go. That's it. That's a little bit of history there for you with Chitlins and the Chitlin circuit. Still alive and well. Still sort of loosely referred to as the Chitlin circuit. And there's a lot of blues artists that went on to worldwide fame and superstardom that got their humble beginnings touring around in that Chitlin circuit. So that's going to do it here for today. Once again, I want to thank you very much for stopping by. I always appreciate that. Please do all the YouTube stuffs, like and share and all that. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. And of course, as always, if you come across any strange word or phrase when you're listening to some of them there blues and you don't know what the heck they're talking about, let me know. Be happy to look into it for you and be more than happy to do a video defining it and describing it for you. So in the meantime, that's it for today. Thanks once again, and we'll talk to you again real soon. All right, take care. Bye-bye.